Well, hey everybody, you have seen me posting about the new product I have called the Skills and Knowledge Checklists. And I thought today I would give you guys a tour so you can see exactly what these checklists look like and hear a little bit about some of the different ways that you can use these to get rid of educational gaps in your child's knowledge and their education, ways that you can use this so that you can keep track of particularly those of you who follow the more holistic approaches to education like unschooling or Waldorf or project-based unit studies and things like that, because I want you to see just how powerful and how flexible this resource is. And I say this resource and these resources because we've got 4 different checklists. There's one for math, one for language arts, one for science, and one for social studies. And so what I've done is for each of those subjects, we've broken down that particular academic subject into all its different subjects, and then broken each of those down into all of these various, what I call skills and content and knowledge bits, those little tiny lessons. So let me give you an example. Let's take a look here. This is the beginning of the math checklist, okay? They're oriented like this so that you can keep your checklist this way, and you've got all this space for each one of these knowledge bits and skills. And you can track these however you want to. So there's no specific way that you have to use these. And when you purchase the checklists, you also get a tutorial video that's going to walk you through 3 different ways that you can use these. And you don't have to use them that way either. It is very, very flexible. Use it however it fits for your family. But I know that some people might download it and then go, I really have no idea exactly how to use it. So I just wanted to give you some options that you could take and then tweak or use or not use. So here, this is how the math checklist starts. It starts with starting concepts. These are the kind of things that you start teaching your kids at 2 and 3 and 4 years old. Things like count to 10, count to 20, count to 100, right? Very little skills, those things that all build. Further down, we have things like creating and extending patterns, copying patterns, skip counting, okay? So those are the starting concepts, and you'll see that when we flip the page, we've got more on the back, right? Whoop, whoop, trying to figure out my camera there. And then you'll see that we also have, at the end of that particular sub list, and at the end of every sub list, there are extra lines where if there's something that you happen to be working with your child and you don't see it anywhere, you go ahead and add it, right? Particularly like those of us who love doing checklists and to-do lists, and we do something that wasn't on our to-do list, we write it down and then check it off, right? You can do the same thing, and then you're keeping track. Oh yeah, we talked about that too, right? I have done my very level best to include every imaginable thing on as many of these as I could, but obviously there's going to be some things I missed. So that gives you some space where you can do that, right? The next page in the math checklist is basic operations, and we start with addition. So now we've got like some sub categories here. So here's the addition, then we have subtraction, then we have multiplication, and then we have division. And this is an old copy. Division now goes on to the next page. And then we have just some miscellaneous ideas that you might kind of incorporate there. And then extra spaces to write what you've done that might not be in there, right? Measurement, fractions, decimals, percents, probability. That goes on for a while because you've got a few things there, right? Ratios, rates, and charts. Geometry, now we're getting into that big stuff, right? And then algebra. Now you might look at algebra and go, there's a lot more to algebra than just that. You are 100% right. Here's why the algebra list is so short. Algebra is about problem solving. It's about taking all these other concepts, all the other things that you learned in all these other subjects, and applying them to problems, okay? Now, if you have a child who is going into working on actual algebraic type problems, chances are you're using a curriculum. And when you start using a curriculum, then you don't need this quite as much because the curriculum is covering everything, right? You know you're not going to end up with gaps in in their algebra work if you're using a curriculum, right? So this is more for particularly in the earlier places where you might not be using curriculum, where you are teaching things through unit studies, or like we were talking about at the very beginning, you're just teaching your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old, your 5-year-old. You're not using curriculum yet because they're still too young and you don't need it, but that doesn't mean you're not teaching them, right? So as you're going through this checklist, you've got all of these things that you can go through and say, okay, yes, we did this. Yes, we did this. Another way you can use it is to say, what do we want to work on? As you've been using it for a while and you start filling things in, you're going to start seeing places where you haven't worked on things. You might flip through and go, gosh, we've got this whole measurement page and we've never checked anything off on that. Maybe we should do some measurement stuff. Particularly for those of you who do unit studies, you know how frustrating it can be to be trying to think back and thinking like, okay, what did we study? What math stuff did we do when we talked about, African biomes? And what math stuff did we do when we were talking about, baseball? Like there are things that you end up doing. They might not even be formal lessons, but they're conversations that you had with your kids, right? They were exposed to ideas. And that is another way that you can use this checklist, is even to use kind of your own check mark nomenclature, right? Your own approach to designate, we talked about this. We didn't formally work on it. We didn't do practice problems. We didn't, I don't think they've mastered the concept, but we talked about it. And then the next time you come around to that, you can go, oh, we've talked about that before. Now we've talked about it again. I'm going to plan now to go back and do that a little more formally, right? So you can use this not just to say, oh, what have we done? Check, check, check. But what do we want to do? What do we still want to work on? What is it that we're missing? So that's an example of the math checklist. Let me go and show you. My favorite one is the science checklist. Y'all, oh my word, there's a lot of stuff in science. It took me forever to make the science one, but it was so much fun because, I know that particularly those of you who have logic-minded kids who really like digging into how things work, you spend a lot of time in science, right? So science has a ton of different areas, and one of the things that I tried to think about as I was putting together the science list was, what are some of those areas that kids tend to get really fascinated by, but aren't necessarily the kinds of things that you're going to always cover, even if you are using a curriculum? For example, we all know that, cliche of the 4-year-old who's memorized all the dinosaurs, right? They're totally into dinosaurs. There's a whole section on paleontology where you can go in and be marking off those things, right? It's not necessarily something that we tend to study in formal science stuff necessarily, but you've got kids who really deep dive on that. I also have a section on things like black holes and wireless technology, things like that, because this is stuff that kids start to get interested in just because they like to dig around and poke around and learn about random concepts, right? But then remember that on each of these sections, you're also going to have these blank spaces where you can be putting in the things that your kids have worked on that isn't necessarily listed here, because I can't list literally every single thing, right? And you might be wondering what all these little marks are that you've been seeing on some of these pages. When I created the tutorial videos that I told you about that are part of what you purchase when you purchase the checklists, I show 3 different ways that you can use the checklists, 3 different ways to actually mark them up. And so the different things you've been seeing are the different ways that I show on that tutorial. So if you're wondering, like, what's all the color? You'll see when you watch the tutorial video after you purchase. But we've got, we start with science. I kind of started big and worked in. So we started first with astronomy, then we went to meteorology, and then we went to, then we went to earth science. And when you go to check, I'll put the link to the purchasing link, and when you go to that page, you'll see a breakdown of what each of the checklists includes. So you'll see what all of these main headings are, each of the sub checklists. It doesn't tell you all this stuff, but it tells you, of course, what are all the main things that you're seeing or that you're getting in each checklist. So zoology, physics, and you're going to get some overlap between physics and math, of course. Chemistry. Okay. Now, again, here's another example of what I was talking about with the algebra, right? Chemistry, there's a ton to chemistry, but the vast majority of what you would cover in that would be covered in a curriculum. So the things that I included in the checklist are the kinds of things that you would probably talk about, for example, when you're talking about baking with your kids, or if you're doing a unit study and you maybe, start talking about like the three different forms of matter. You've got gas, you've got liquid, you've got solids, right? So things that were likely to come up outside of using a curriculum when it comes to chemistry, those are the things that got put on this list. But remember, you've got all of these spaces where you can add in extra stuff. And I will also add that at the end of each checklist, so for example, at the end of the science checklist, at the end of the math checklist, there is a full page that is just a blank checklist. It doesn't have any headings. It's got the space where you can write what your child has done, and then it's got all of this checklist spots, right? All the check boxes, so that if you happen to, for example, maybe you've got a book, maybe your child went through a book that talked about all sorts of different concepts. You can write those concepts down. We talked about that, learned that, tried that, did this, even though they aren't things that I necessarily talked about in the checklists. So for some of these topics that are really, really in depth that you typically are going to use a curriculum for, you're not going to see as much information, but you can add the information if you need to. Human studies, that's the next one. And human studies ranges from everything like biology and genetics through anatomy and physiology, psychology, biochemistry, all sorts of stuff. It's not just anatomy, right? Archaeology and paleontology, super fun. Technology, and then let's see, I think we've got two more for this one. Nutrition and health. I did that separate from the human studies because it is such a huge topic in and of itself. And then my favorite part of the science checklist, famous scientists, 101 famous scientists. There are women, there are non-Europeans, there are people of color. We've got all sorts of different people on this list. They're not all modern. Archimedes is one of them, I believe. We've got all sorts of people from all sorts of different, from all sorts of different topics, and all sorts of different time periods, and all sorts of different fields of study within science. And then, like I said, here is an example of the blank checklist, right? So here is the blank checklist, front and back. Actually, this one does not have the back. They usually have front and back. So that you can list, because that's why, because the front on the science one, it printed on the back of the famous scientist checklist. So that hopefully kind of gives you a better understanding of how these checklists work, how you can interact with them, the different ways you can use them. If you have any questions about how the checklists might work for your situation, please message me. I am more than happy to give you any kind of feedback to help you decide, is this what our family needs? Is this going to be helpful for us or not? So feel free to message me at allison@goodschooling.com, Allison with one L. If you have any questions, and take a look. I'll put the link to the checklists in the description so that you can go check those out and take a look, and you'll see the video there. There's a short video that kind of gives you some more information. Trisha just said, hi, Trisha. And so please let me know if you have any questions. I know you guys are going to find this so helpful, particularly those of you who are really plagued by that fear that so many homeschooling families are, that you're going to miss something. You can't miss it if you're using these checklists. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what questions you have, and I will talk to you again later. All right, have a great rest of your week, y'all. Bye.